It's Thursday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster. EU leaders hold emergency talks on Ukraine and unveil plans to boost defence spending.
Beyond Ukraine, the threat of Russia is there and it touches European countries and is touching us.
Also today, will changes to sentencing bring in a two-tier justice system?
Why is the Justice Secretary enshrining this double standard? This two-tier approach to sentencing?
There will never be a two-tier sentencing approach under my watch or under this Labour government.
Rachel Reeves is set to cut billions from the welfare bill, but what will that mean for people on benefits? And she was a poster child for the left. Does Ash Sarkar have any regrets? Joining us today, Labour MP Alice MacDonald, Ash Sarkar from Novara Media and the author of Minority Rule, and Kate Andrews from The Spectator. We're hoping to soon be joined by Lord Bethell, a Conservative peer. This is Politics Live. Let's start with the story you heard at the beginning of the programme in the headlines. EU leaders are gathering in Brussels to discuss Ukraine and the threat from Russia. You can see here Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, being greeted there by Ursula von der Leyen, the head of the European Commission. This, of course, follows the decision and announcement by the US Trump administration to pause military aid to Ukraine and cut them out of intelligence sharing. The Defence Secretary John Healey is due to be meeting his counterpart in the US to discuss all of this. Meanwhile, this headline in The Independent, it's from covering a quote from Ukraine's ambassador to the UK and says the US is destroying the world order, according to the Ukrainian ambassador, who also says NATO could cease to exist and Russia could target Europe next after Donald Trump's moves towards the Kremlin. Alice, starting with you, do you agree that the US is destroying the world order?
I think what is clear is, what I do think is a pretty extraordinary moment for us all in the world. And what I have seen as an MP is our Prime Minister really stepping up and leading. And, you know, there's this important summit today, as you mentioned, the Defence Secretary is in Washington. And that's the approach that this government is taking, which is trying to get to that sustained peace that we all need. And it's very clear that Ukraine has to be front and centre of that. And it's, you know, President Zelensky is there at that European summit today. And we have put up, you know, we've committed to put up defence spending. And that's an example of the practical things that we are doing as a country, what we can to play our part in getting to the peace that I think everybody wants.
When you say it's an extraordinary moment that we have arrived at, what do you mean? Do you agree broadly with the Ukrainian ambassador that extraordinary moment is because the US is destroying the world order, or extraordinary because Donald Trump has made Europe put its hands in its pockets for defence spending? I
think just extraordinary in terms of what is happening in the world right now. And of course, what happens in Ukraine is important for the future of Ukraine, but it's also important for our national security. And, you know, I'm a relatively recently elected member of Parliament. We've had a statement on Ukraine every week. We're talking about it a huge amount. And I think what we have seen is a Prime Minister that is serious about getting to that peace.
Ash Sarkar, do you think the US is destroying the world order as we knew it?
Well, I think that he's certainly reshaping the world order in line with what he said he was going to do. Donald Trump's worldview, I think, can be boiled down to this. He thinks that there are three global apex predators. There's America, there's China, and there's Russia. And when he says America first, he doesn't mean America plus Ukraine. He doesn't mean America plus Britain. He means America first, America's interests first. For me, the thing which is, I think, appalling about this situation is, one, we have paved the way in many respects in weakening international law. So that's why you have Russia waging a war of aggression. I mean, we kind of did that first with Iraq. I mean, we led the way when it came to, unlawful invasions on flimsy pretexts. The second thing is that we've spent decades following America along like a little lapdog, hoping to get the crumbs from them and shaping our defence policy around them.
I suppose they would say, the government, successive governments, that they are the most powerful country in the world.
But it's left us, I think, in a bad position now. Why do we have two aircraft carriers? they're not useful for a land war in Europe. Russia doesn't have a single functioning aircraft carrier because they know what they're looking to do. We've got 2 aircraft carriers, which were very expensive, came in 50% over budget because we thought we'd have to follow America into a war in the Pacific. Now America's changed its geopolitical orientation. We've been left twisting in the wind.
Right, what do you think? Do you think the world order is being destroyed, or, as Ash has indicated, that actually weakening of international law, wars like the war in Iraq, when UK and troops stood by America, first of all, in Afghanistan, that has emboldened Russia?
Well, I think Donald Trump has shaken this up enough that it's very legitimate to ask the question if the world order is being destroyed. I don't think anybody can be confident enough right now to know the answer because things are changing so quickly. I think when we saw that blow up in the Oval Office last Friday, everybody felt like the world, literally the world, was about to fall apart. Then on Tuesday, Donald Trump gives his address to the joint session of Congress where he reads out the letter from President Zelensky and he says, "I'm very happy to have received this letter. Imagine if we get peace." And I think one thing to understand about Donald Trump, as Ash hinted at there, he really often says what he plans to do, and he told Europe 8 years ago that they needed to spend more money on defense. Europe didn't listen. He said during the election he wanted to bring this to an end very quickly. We're now seeing radical behavior, good and bad, in order to achieve that. And this is a president who says he wants the Nobel Peace Prize. I really do believe he wants it. I do believe he wants to bring an end to the fighting. One reason to be optimistic, and I appreciate not many right now, you mentioned Iraq there. I'm going to look at it from a slightly different angle. When we talk about Iraq, and particularly Afghanistan, Donald Trump is very aware that the withdrawal from Afghanistan is forever a stain now on President Joe Biden's record. I do not believe he wants a similar stain when it comes to Ukraine and the unimaginable scenes we might see there, were America to actually completely withdraw aid. I think that is one reason to think that Donald Trump's ultimate goal is still to get both Russia and Ukraine to the table.
Well, let's welcome James Bethel to Politics Live. We've been discussing the comments from the Ukrainian ambassador to the UK. Headline here in The Independent, the US destroying the world order. Do you agree with him?
Kate has put it really well, I think. Donald Trump is doing exactly what he said he was going to do, and that is shaking things up massively.
Well, shaking things up and destroying the world order, is it something to be welcomed or not?
Well, the world order has probably come to an end of its own account. The breakdown in the relationship between China and America has been playing out for some time, and the defence deficit in Europe has been incompatible with reality for decades. I think that he is giving it a massive shake. I find it very alarming. I'm not enjoying this process at all. But we should take him at his word, and it would be a big mistake to try to hope or guess that he's trying to do something else and has a second plan up his sleeve.
Right. What do you make? I mean, Alice has said that the Prime Minister is playing a pivotal role, been statesmanlike, to paraphrase what you were saying, in terms of trying to be a bridge between the US and Europe. Do you agree?
Well, he has played a blinder so far, tribute to him. But Britain being a bridge is really tough. And my advice to the Prime Minister, for what it's worth, is do not for a moment think that Donald Trump is suddenly going to cave in because of some kind of charm offensive by Europe. We do have to step up to our responsibilities, and I'm worried that we're not seeing the signals that those purchase orders are going into the defence manufacturers.
All right, let's have a look at this headline in BBC News. Call for ministers to overrule two-tier sentencing changes. Yes, these are changes that have been published by the Sentencing Council, new guidelines for judges, and actually they will be asked to make the ethnicity or faith of an offender a bigger factor when deciding whether to jail them. Now, as it happens, there is some political consensus here between the Shadow Justice Secretary, who has coined this phrase two-tier sentencing changes, because the Justice Secretary, as you heard in the headlines, Shabana Mahmood, agrees with him. But first of all, why would these sentencing guidelines lead to a two-tier system?
Well, I think what is clear, and you paid the clip, is that we've been clear that we don't want that system.
But,
I actually
but
think
why?
we're focusing on the Sentencing Council is an independent body, and that's the recommendation they've made. We've obviously got this bigger sentencing review going on that is important. I think for me there are some really big questions around the shape of the criminal justice system for the future. We've got a huge court backlog. You know, it's International Women's Day tomorrow. We've got women waiting years for their rape cases to be heard. That is just not right. So actually, I think what is important is that we are focusing on some of the changes that need to happen right now, which is more sitting hours.
But you agree that these sentencing changes, then, let me put it to you another way, would lead to a two-tier sentencing system?
Well, I think what Shabana Mahmood is saying is that we absolutely don't want that. There are pre-sentencing reports that happen.
Right, but they're going to come in because there's no power for ministers to overrule them at the moment. So if they come in, we'll have a two-tier sentencing system.
I know the Justice Secretary is writing and raising her concerns with the Sentencing Council. There was obviously a consultation that started under the last Conservative government. I think you can see the strong language she used, and obviously I'm sure she will be doing what she can in this area.
Right, she says, as someone who is from an ethnic minority background myself, I do not stand for any differential treatment before the law for anyone of any kind. Do you agree with Robert Jenrick, the Shadow Justice Secretary, when he says that the guidelines, the new guidelines, are biased against straight white men?
I put my head in my hands when I heard about this. I try to defend the justice system against people who are very critical of it, but this completely undermines my whole stance. The idea that one person should be judged differently over another on the colour of their skin is exactly what we've been fighting against for years. So I am really troubled by this, and I agree with both Robert and Shamana that this shouldn't come through.
Right. Do you agree?
This is all complete rubbish. This is a misreported story.
Why is it misreported? What's misreported?
One is that the proposed changes are about pre-sentencing
Yes,
reports.
they're reports.
Pre-sentencing reports can't compel judges to make
No,
different
they are
decisions.
guidelines.
But what they do is they say you have to consider this person's situation.
That's right.
What the proposed changes are is that if someone is from a minority ethnic background, if they're pregnant, if there's mental health issues, a history of abuse, if there's a history of being in the care system, maybe you want to have a look at this person.
Well, I think more than maybe, you're going to be advised to take that into account in a bigger way than perhaps you had before, because over recent years their use has decreased.
And I completely agree with the idea that there should be no distinction made on the basis of ethnicity for whether or not someone should get a harsher or lighter sentence. Everyone agrees with that, but that is not what is on the table here at all. Instead, what you've got is ideologically motivated actors taking up the story, making it sound scary. You've got Robert Jenrick taking it up as a big bully stick, and then you've got Labour going, oh, no, we're worried about looking bad. So then they're sort of reinforcing, I think, an inherently misrepresentative
I don't think she's worried about
story.
looking bad. I think she's being very clear about the kind of justice system we
Then
want,
why
which
can't
is
you
that
tell the
people are
truth about
treated
what
equally.
pre-sentencing reports are for?
I think ideally we would have pre-sentencing reports for everyone. We don't have that resource at the moment. It is an important part to look at some of the causes.
So then you agree with the change, you don't disagree with the change?
No, what I am saying is that we don't want a two-tier system, which is what I think Shabana Mahmood is being clear about.
But
so
do you think that these proposals are a two-tier system?
I don't think she...
I do.
You do? Why? So what do you say in response to Ash?
Does the
Because
government...
you're baking into the justice system bias based on someone's gender or ethnicity. And those are the principles that we have been fighting against for a very, very long time. I don't like the reputation of the law is also at stake here. I don't like the idea that I will be judged differently from someone else based on my gender or my ethnicity, and I really don't see why it should be.
Let's leave ethnicity out of it for a second.
That is central to these.
Wait, hang on a second. The other categories where they say that what they want is pre-sentencing reports for this group of people, it includes people who are pregnant, it includes people who have experienced abuse. Do you think that there should be pre-sentencing reports for those categories of people?
The bit that I am particularly outraged by...
Well, hang on, let him finish.
And what is the problem for me as a politician who's trying to, in many ways, stand up for the institutions of justice that a lot of people are trying to attack, is that when this kind of thing turns up, it makes my job extremely difficult indeed. And the explanations that you're giving don't stand up to me to scrutiny.
I'm going to come back to you, Ash, again, because I know you feel strongly about it. But, Kate, where are you? Because Helena Kennedy, barrister, Labour member of the House of Lords, says a well-informed court is always going to do better in its outcomes and provide a more just outcome. She says the current justice system doesn't have the confidence of women, of ethnic minority communities, and has been skewed in a way where women end up in prison when they shouldn't.
I think that's all completely right. This is sloppily written. And how many times does this happen where actually governments don't do their jobs in the years previous and then something comes to the table? And this debate, I think, has shown that. The fact that ethnicity has become a factor, but also that mental health and abuse and time in the care system have been lumped into this altogether, suggests that there is a lot of common ground to be found, but also sloppy language, quick decision-making, quick laws being created, put people and governments and courts in a position down the line where they're in really, really tricky spots. People aren't thinking things through enough. And I do hope Labour, with its big majority, takes advantage of the opportunity to do some serious criminal justice reform. When Labour appointed Lord Timpson as their prisons minister, that was a great indication that we could look at sentencing for young people, first-time offenders, rehabilitation. That stuff is so important for a functioning society and for the overall notion of forgiveness, which we often lose in politics. But you cannot ever have a justice system or defend an institution where the God that you pray to or the color of your skin means that you're going to get a worse or a lesser sentence, not least because look at knife crime in London. I mean, the disproportionate community affected by that, the victims, are Black Britons. We have to think about the victims as well and the fact that they are often in minority groups, and we can't have them feeling like the person who has harmed them is going to get a lesser sentence based on those factors.
Ash?
So the first thing is that I don't think that that is what is on the table. When it comes to ethnic minority communities, what we know is that they are more likely to get prison sentences than white people who are being charged with the exact same crime. So I can understand that this might be a ham-fisted way of trying to address it, but a pre-sentencing report, I mean, I don't think that's a bad way to say, let's take a better look at this individual. And I wanted to ask you about victims of abuse for a reason, because particularly for women, many women who are in prison are there following abusive relationships. And I don't think it's a bad thing for judges to be told, hey, why don't you consider this person's story in the round? So leaving ethnicity aside, right, because I understand your feelings about it, are you in favour of pre-sentencing reports for victims of abuse and people who've been through the care system?
100%, and I think you put that very well indeed. And that isn't the part of this that alarms me. It is specifically the ethnicity and the gender parts of it that make my life as a politician trying to defend the institutions of justice extremely difficult indeed.
Right, but should we be thinking about how difficult your job is insofar as making these sorts of decisions?
Well, I can only sit here describing my life in my own terms. But yes, I think we're under threat. The basic institutions that hold this country together are being questioned in a really serious way. And I'm just shocked by this proposal because of its inflammatory nature and how short-sighted and weird of this panel to have come up with this recommendation, given what they know about the result.
It is interesting, the sort of shock and outrage on all sides, because these were guidelines that were consulted on. I mean, they were consulted on, I think, some time ago, last year, and it seems as if everybody's been taken by surprise. Why?
Yes, well, I think Kate has a point that there is some sloppy policy making coming out of the MOJ at the moment. We do need a shake-up of the system. It does need to be brought into modern terms. This is not the way to do it.
Right, but let's go back to the sort of core of it. Do you think this is and will result in a two-tier system of criminal justice? Because even if Shabana Mahmood, the Justice Secretary, makes steps to overrule it, it's going to take time. And in other words, you're saying that's what we're going to get.
I think what I would like is a slightly broader conversation around sentencing more broadly, because I do think we are at risk of focusing on an issue that is going to undermine some trust and confidence in these areas. And actually, that's exactly the point of the broader sentencing review that is being looked at. And it is important we look at the reasons why people end up offending. It's important that we have appropriate punishments in place. Prison, obviously, but also things in the community. We've got a huge backlog in our courts. We've got not very much capacity in our prisons. So that's why Shabana Mahmood and the Ministry of Justice is trying to get to grips with that crisis. So,
well, let me just read to you from the Sentencing Council Chairman, Lord Justice William Davis, said the updated guidelines would ensure courts have the most comprehensive information available to them before deciding on a punishment. That surely is a good thing.
That is important, but you should ideally have this for everyone, and that is a question of resource, because actually looking at the background is important. But I'm not sure that we should really be differentiating. And I agree, women who've been victims of domestic abuse, for example, it's important to look at those backgrounds, but I just think we run the risk of getting into an argument that's not looking at the overall holistic picture here.
Right, although he's saying it's actually skewed against it. I'll just finish and come to you. He said they took into account evidence of disparities in sentencing outcomes, disadvantages faced within the criminal justice system and complexities in circumstances of individual offenders. The Prison Reform Trust said there were very good reasons for changes to sentencing guidelines. They cite the problem of imprisoning pregnant women and mothers. Do you accept that?
Yes, I mean, I think that there are challenges, but the bit of it that I find difficult is the equivalence of someone who is the victim of abuse, which Ash put extremely well indeed, and somebody who is being defined by their gender or by their race. That is not an equivalent differentiation.
I just find this really quite funny because I think that, again, this is a classic case of it wasn't particularly controversial last year. Right-wing media picked up on it, and now you've got politicians being like, oh, no, this is really awful. And this happens not just when it comes to issues like within, you know, the MOJ. This happens with so many social issues.
But does that dispute sincerely held view that it might be a divisive and problematic?
So I think that if we look at it, which is, do you think that judges should have a lot of information about the individual before sentencing them? All of us agree, right? All of us also agree that there is a problem of resources. So what these recommendations are saying, well, why don't we start here with these groups? What I'm not hearing, and maybe you guys can tell me why, is if we know that people of colour disproportionately get harsher sentences than their white counterparts, even when being accused of the same crime, why shouldn't ethnicity be one of the places where we start for saying, all right, the judge needs a fuller picture of what led to you committing this offence?
Well, sentencing guidelines are an incredibly important tool, and there is an obligation for the judges to take those matters into consideration. The idea that your gender and your ethnicity should define the judgment made against you.
But it's not. It's the pre-sentencing report. That's not defining the judgment.
It is definitely influencing it. It is part of the paperwork.
Because it's saying, let's look at this person.
And there is a formula that requires the judge to take those matters into account. I don't think that someone should be judged on the basis of either their gender or their ethnicity. Well, then whether or not there are, and I do agree with you that there are rightly social issues that we need to address. Bending the judicial system is not the way to do that.
Well, let me show you this tweet from Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the opposition. If the Justice Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, doesn't want a two-tier criminal justice system, she should change the law and the Conservatives will back her. Ministers should decide, not quangos. Labour need to grip this. What would you say in response?
Well, I think Shabana Mahmood was yesterday setting her position out very clearly, and as I said, as I understand it, she will be writing to the Sentencing Council about these issues.
Let's have a look, not at the headline I can see in front of me, but the next one from BBC News, which is work coaches to focus on long-term unemployed. You will have heard on yesterday's programme the story from the BBC's economics editor that Rachel Reeves looks set, the Chancellor, to cut billions of pounds from the welfare budget in order to balance the books. But today we have this announcement of using 1,000 work coaches to help the long-term unemployed into work. Now, coaches are already employed by job centres, but will be redeployed to focus on tackling economic inactivity, according to the Department of Work and Pensions. Are you in favour of cutting billions from welfare, Alice?
Well, I'm in favour of supporting people get back into work, because my experience of being an MP is I do meet a lot of people who would like to work but don't have the support to do that. And quite frankly, we have a system that isn't working. Constituents I've met, they're actually entitled to support they're not not aware of the support available to them. So there's a lot of obviously speculation around this at the moment. We don't know what the exact proposal will be.
Well, I don't think there's any speculation about billions being cut from the welfare budget.
There are obviously difficult decisions about it, but what we have actually set out is some of these measures to help people get into work. The long-term coaches that you talked about.
How much do you think can be saved by 1,000 work coaches?
In terms of what?
In terms of the billions that are going to be, we're expected to be cut from the welfare budget. Are work coaches going to be the answer to getting all those people back into work?
No, clearly they're not the answer to everything. It's a package of measures that we need. And a lot of people are not able to work because of long-term health reasons, which is exactly why we're investing in the NHS, so that people, we've already delivered the 2 million extra appointments that we promised. And that is helping people get, whether it's physical health or mental health support that they need to be able to work. And I do feel that people do want to work if they're able to, and we are helping to increase those opportunities. 1 million young people not in education and employment. That is a scandal, frankly, and we do need to sort out the system so that we address these longer-term promises. The work coaches are part of the problem. They're not, the silver bullet that's going to solve everything.
Right. I mean, Ash Sarkar, I think Shabana Mahmood, the Justice Secretary, to refer to her again, said it was a moral mission to get people back into work. These are all positive changes.
If you think that you're going to get £5 billion worth of savings out of work coaches...
Well, I think we've heard from Alice. I think from Alice.
We clearly don't.
Come on, be for
They must be very good, these work
They
coaches.
must be, I mean, God, the magicians, all of them. Here's the thing about... You're only going to make savings of the kind that Rachel Reeves wants to make if you stop people from getting benefits. All right? That's the only way you can make these savings. It's not me saying it, the IFS are saying it. Paul Johnson is saying this. This isn't, crazy lefties like me. So I think what's on the table here is austerity with a red rosette. And what we know from 14 years of Tory austerity is that it creates very expensive problems. We have a less healthy population.
I think it's austerity when we've put 22 billion into the NHS.
I think it is austerity when you're taking money out of the benefit system. Right? It is.
I see it as supporting people get into work who want to
There are lots
work.
of people who can't work because one of the
course,
reasons
and
why
they
is
need to be
14 years of
supported.
austerity. And there are, the savings of the kind Rachel Reeves wants to make will not be achieved without cutting benefits. There is no way you can do it. So either Rachel Reeves is an idiot, and I don't think she is, where she genuinely thinks that if you have 1,000 work coaches, you can save £5 billion. I don't think she's an idiot. Or I think she's being not entirely honest about what these proposals are actually going to entail.
Well, let me go to
and my experience of politicians tells me that liars are more common than idiots.
Right. What I'm saying, though, is we haven't actually... There isn't proposals set out here. Obviously, we've had a white paper that set out lots of measures around this, like the youth guarantee, for example. So... Surely you agree there
Where's
are people
the £5 billion gonna come from?
who are on benefits who do want to work and with a bit of extra support
Well,
could
answer
do
that. Do you agree? There are people who are on benefits who would like to work and need support to get back to work.
Sure, and I think that the way in which you do that is you can bring in all sorts of changes. So for some people, when they start looking for work, it means that the amount of money that they get in terms of benefits goes down. So you're disincentivized to look for work. That's one change that you could make. Another change you could make is to actually invest in the economy and invest in people, which stimulates spending and grows the economy. What we've got at the moment is a blank cheque for bombs and austerity for Brits at home. The 1.5 billion that Keir Starmer's promised for Ukraine, that's the amount that you would have saved from the winter fuel allowance.
Well, what do you think, Kate? Do you think you
priorities.
can make significant savings, first of all, from the welfare budget, billions of pounds?
I think you can. I agree with Ash that some people really do need this money and some people are very genuinely sick and can't work and they should be supported. We also have a huge problem post-COVID. The number of people on some kind of out-of-work benefit nearly doubled. It's at nearly 6 million people now. People went home during furlough and millions have decided not to come back. That's not to say every single one of them. Indeed, I'm sure millions do need the support. But there is a really good reason to think that the current sickness bill, which was £65 billion last year, estimated to be £100 billion by the end of this Parliament, that not all of that money is fundamentally needed for people who are suffering from real sickness that cannot allow them to work, especially as technology is rapidly advancing, AI is coming in, and it's easier to work from home. We have to believe that those numbers are not quite right. Something's gone very bad post-COVID when it comes to incentives to work, and that something can be fixed. I also think if you take Ash's point of view that perhaps we just do want a state where we spend more on people and invest more in people, I'm not at all convinced you're going to see the economic returns for that. I think you have a lot of welfare systems in the UK that clearly are not providing the economic returns. But the last way you want to do that is through sickness benefit. You do not want to incentivize people to say that they have bigger problems than they do. You almost want to look at something more like a universal income. I'm very nervous about how that would work politically speaking, but it was Milton Friedman, it was a free market economist who actually came up with the idea of a negative income tax. If you want to give people money, give them cash, let them spend it freely. Do not incentivize them to go into the benefit system when they don't need it. The last thing I want to say is that we are talking about £5 billion here. To me, the horror of all of this is that the UK, when it's an emergency, when it's needed, when we're talking about defence spending to protect Ukraine and to protect the UK, can't find it. And that is the trouble of successive governments, Tory and Labour, I'm sorry to say, that did not take the public finances seriously. The fact that Rachel Reeves is desperately going to try to find a couple of £1 billion to boost defence spending shows what a dire financial state the UK is actually in.
Well, do you want to take some responsibility for that, James?
The bank card has been maxed out. We're in a perilous state, I agree, and we have to make these defence commitments. Can I just, though, say a word for work coaches? They really are important and do make a difference. And can I also say a word for the sick? I think Katie's got a point that too many people are on sickness benefit, but there are a lot of very sick people in this country, and we do need to do something to get the country back on its feet.
Right, but do you think there are incentives, or rather disincentives, I should say, for people to go out and work?
No, something has gone badly wrong with our benefits system. But one of the things that's gone wrong is we're not offering people the support either to get better from their fundamental underlying health or to improve their skills and get back into the workplace.
So I presume you weren't a fan of that part of the Conservative manifesto in the last election that said £12 billion a year could be taken out of the welfare system in terms of savings?
We've got 9.5 million people in the UK at the moment who should be working, who aren't working. And that is something we definitely need to address. And I am supportive of the idea of trying to get our welfare bill down.
Right, sure. But by £12 billion a year, I mean, the IFS, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, said that that wasn't up to the challenge, the manifesto that was printed when it came to finding that amount of money from the welfare system.
I don't want to put a number on what is the precise amount, but it is of the order of many billions, for sure.
Right. Well, I mean, one person who did, of course, take an awful lot of money out of the welfare system was George Osborne, a previous Conservative Chancellor in the age of austerity. There were many Labour MPs who came in, like you, fighting against those years of austerity. And yet, are you going to be, as Ash said, the red rosette on a new kind of austerity with these cuts to welfare?
No, absolutely not in terms of austerity. I think we've been very clear there's no return to austerity with Labour, which is why we are investing in public services. That's why we had to make difficult choices in the budget to free that money up. So I think there is actually quite a lot of consensus across the panel on many areas. There are some people who will need benefits because they simply can't work, but there's just not enough flexibility in the system. You know, I know people who would like to try working, but they feel that if they do that, they're at risk of losing all the support if they're not actually able to do it. And I think there are some changes fundamentally, as well as looking at the money and how the system works, that will bring real changes.
I'm not going to speak for Ash, and she's already said it. I'm still not going to speak for you, but I suspect that this side of the panel does very much think austerity is about to take place, perhaps from very different angles. You're talking about spending cuts. That is certainly a form of austerity. Tax rises are a form of austerity, and we always conveniently forget that. But Labour is already doing austerity. It looks like they're going to be doing some more. I think,
I just don't understand how when you look at the investment in public services, you would say that when, as we've heard, you know,
because
George Osborne, when he was Chancellor, actually
you've hiked taxes by tens of billions of pounds in the last budget. You've been hiking taxes. Welfare is going to be cut further. Austerity is taking place. I think it would be much more prudent for the Labour Party to stop talking about austerity as if it's something that only the Tories can do. When the country is in a financially perilous position,
that's why we're actually talking
difficult
about
decisions have to be made.
Not austerity.
But there are choices to be made. I mean, you're talking tax rises that have gone up, but certainly under the Conservatives, and they have also gone up to Labour. It's going to be spending cuts this time around because Rachel Roos doesn't want to break her fiscal rules, and also because she doesn't want to borrow any more money. Is that the right political choice?
I mean, also look at what's happening to unprotected budgets. So there are many councils which are teetering on the edge of bankruptcy.
And they've had a real-time terms uplift under this government.
How are they going to make up the shortfall without more spending from central government?
Well, there has been more spending
The thing is, sorry, I listened to you very patiently.
Sorry, you're right.
The stuff about we're not the party of austerity is in rhetoric. When you look at the nitty-gritty, yes, there are areas where you're boosting spending, that's very welcome, but look at what's subject to fiscal rules and what isn't. When it comes to defence spending, it's a blank cheque. I know you might think that that's perfectly legitimate, that's fine. But when it comes to things like welfare, when it comes to things that people need in order to survive after having been punished, but with rounds and rounds of brutal austerity policy, then suddenly you've got to operate within the fiscal rules. It seems to be one rule for one set of spending priorities and another for another.
Well, I think if you look at my background is international development. That's what I've worked in for years. So there was a very tough decision last week on where we got the money for the defence spending.
And did you agree with it?
I think, as the Prime Minister himself says, it wasn't a decision he was happy to take. I would have,
From that sector, do you think it was the right decision to take money from international aid and put it into defence?
I think our international aid is also important in terms of, defence, diplomacy, development. They all go together. But I recognise it was a tough decision. But I guess my point is that we are already making these tough choices. National security it is obviously the number one priority as a government. If you can't keep your people safe,
but it seems to
you
me
can't
that
do much
some
else.
departments get to waste and others are put under a microscope. I mean, when it comes to MOD spending, we spend more than France and we get less than them.
But do you think the welfare budget is too big? The bill at the moment is too big?
So the majority of that welfare budget is going on pensions. It's the fact that we have
Would you cut the triple lock?
No, I'm saying that we've got an ageing population.
You would.
Of course I would.
I think that...
And you would too.
I mean, gosh,
Yeah, 100%.
I think
it's
the
so
best
affordable.
I think the best way to do it, and I know you're going to disagree with me on this, we've been agreeing too much, it was dangerous, here it comes, is inheritance taxes. I think the minute you start, really means testing what gets to older people, inevitably some people are going to be left out of it. That's why I'm so against, the changes to winter fuel allowance, because you're going to leave some people out. If you want to take that money back after having spent it on people who may not have needed it because they were rich, is you take it back after they've passed away.
I think it's incredibly important if you are going to propose more money or say that budgets can't be cut, you have to say where you'd find the money. And this is inheritance tax adjacent. But the fact that, if you would be passing on a lot of inheritance, but you don't have to contribute it all to your social care, is a point that Theresa May tried to make and lost an election on. But there was a very important point to make there. The very, very tough decisions to be made about where this money comes from, it might involve tax hikes, it might involve spending cuts as well, in order for the government to do what it needs to do on the international stage. Right. But you can't pretend, and I don't think you are, you can't pretend it's not going to come from nowhere. My frustration is the idea that all of this is being done and nobody's really going to get hurt and there aren't going to be winners and losers in the tax or spending cut side of it. Austerity has been affecting the country for 15 years in different ways. Right. Labour are continuing it.
Before we move on, are you in favour of keeping the triple lock?
Yes, and that's been very clear from our government.
Yeah, but you're not.
No, it's
and nor are you, but you are.
I just think that you need to deal with inheritance tax.
Well, let's talk about your book, because it's come out, Minority Rule, Adventures in the Culture War. Sounds exciting. What's it about?
I spent 3 years locked in my spare room having a nervous breakdown on a Google Doc, and this is the result. It's a book which is trying to address quite a simple question, which is, why is it in this era of widening inequality, has it that class consciousness has actually gone into decline? And my argument is that we have become hyper-fixated on issues of identity, and that's not just on the left. Well, it is on the centre, it's on the right. The media are obsessed with it, politicians are obsessed with it, and what's happening underneath all of this froth and noise is a historic wealth grab by the super rich.
Kate?
Haven't read your book yet. I'm looking forward to it because I think it's a very interesting idea, and again, having not read it, it sounds like there's a lot of truth in the idea that the left in particular, but I completely agree that the right does its own form of culture wars, lost its way on what really mattered to its core supporters and its base. We saw this in the US-American election. The fact that the Democrats could only talk about identity politics and culture wars and the names they were calling Republican voters and the names they were calling Donald Trump. You might think it personally, but keep it to yourself, because actually there were a lot of working class Democrats who said to themselves, the issues that Donald Trump is talking about matter a lot more than the culture wars and identity politics that the Democrats won't shut up about. And look at what happened. He won every swing state. He increased his vote share. He won the popular vote. It's a very, very important point, I think, that you're making, almost regardless of what your dream political outcome is when it comes to public policy or government. The fact that a lot of people have wanted to focus on the culture wars means that we haven't really been talking about defence or the outcomes of healthcare or the outcomes of education in the way that we probably should have.
Right. Did the left lose its way when you were heavily involved? You weren't a member for a very long time, or only 7 months of the Labour Party, but did the left lose its way when Jeremy Corbyn was leader of the Labour Party and they went down to that historic defeat?
I actually think it's sort of bigger than that we did become, I think, really fixated on policing people's language, on these sort of micro social interactions, and it's just a vortex. You're never going to get out of it. However, and this is a really important point, and this is the one that no one likes to talk about, is that, if you're going to say, all right, we've become obsessed with identity, who else has been driving it? I mean, it's the media. The media would rather, 9 times out of 10, you were arguing about trans people and toilets and pronouns, then you were talking about why is it that Thames Water's been loaded with debt, the shareholders got a big payout, and then the same company that did that, Macquarie, have been, you know, given a red carpet to come back and buy up our gas infrastructure by Keir Starmer.
But was that merely a reflection of what was being discussed in political circles on both the left and the right? I mean, there's a quote from you in the book on 2019. This is, I was 25 and certainly the left was, the left was on the brink of making history. In hindsight, I was self-deluding and hubristic.
Yeah, I was. And I'll tell you why I said that. Because after 2017, I thought the most important thing was that Labour got the most left-wing manifesto possible. Yeah. And I forgot, and this is, you know, might make me sound super stupid, is that I forgot that there are more people in the country who aren't like me.
You have to count, as some American politicians say.
LBJ said the first rule of politics is learn how to count. And so this book is a product of me trying to get out of the bubble. But again, just to put the focus on, I think, where it really ought to go. If you want to talk about who's fixating on what, 2% of people in this country think that trans issues is a top 3 political issue. 2%. And let me tell you, all of them work in the media.
Well, perhaps you'd like to respond, because culture wars and culture identity politics was very much at the centre of the politics under Boris Johnson.
Yes, it was. And I find it heartbreaking. I'm 100% with Ash on what I'm hearing her say. This is an extremely cohesive country if you compare us to, say, America, that Kate referred to. We actually rub along with each other extremely well on a personal basis. If you look at any of the analysis, the More in Common work is very, very powerful on this. We're actually a country that loves itself and gets on with its neighbour very well. The identity politics on both the neoliberal left and on the right is incredibly corrosive and breaks that up enormously. And it is heightened by social media, but I'm not seeking to blame that. I wish we could get rid of it altogether. It is a massive distraction from the major issues that we've got at the moment. Challenging big industry is, I know, Ash's big priority. In some ways, I agree with her on some of that. But getting growth back online and defending our country is much bigger priority than squabbling about culture.
Right, but I mean, Ash is saying it's the media, right-wing media particularly, and politicians that have pushed it.
I don't think blaming the media, I think, is overstated. Listen, it's extremely easy, particularly with the social media algorithms, to elicit anger and raw emotion out of exaggeration and divisive memes. Politicians should definitely show restraint on that, and this kind of stirring is really breaking, in danger of breaking our country up.
Alice?
Well, I think I haven't read the book yet. I know you're in Norwich later today, actually. I think we all kind of agree that. I think if you look back to 2019, when I was talking to people on the doorstep, I knew that we weren't going to win because people didn't believe we could pay for all those things that we wanted, even if they thought the ideas were good. And actually, I think, most people are just thinking, have I got a good school for my kids? Can I afford a home? Have I got a good job? And does the NHS work for me? And actually focusing on these issues is really important. So, and we as politicians have a responsibility to help shape the political discourse as well by I think culture wars have been damaging in many ways.
I mean, somebody said the art of politics is the art of persuasion. And do you think that's been lost in the sort of past decade almost, this reaching out across the divide, trying to persuade people rather than going for perhaps a more extreme agenda on one side or the other? Or, in fact, it was Ed Miliband who went for the sort of 35% strategy. As you say, you've got to learn to count the numbers.
Well, what I'd say is that there's a form of reaching across the aisle where you've got the, billionaire backers on one side and the billionaire backers on the other, all agreeing that we can't have a wealth tax. That's one vision of bipartisanship. And then there's another. There's someone who I know, who I'm very, very close to, who wants zero immigration, weed to be legalised, he hates Brexit, he'd like me to be Prime Minister, and failing that, Nigel Farage.
Good luck.
Right? Those are his beliefs.
The Ash Nigel voter.
And
famous, yes.
It's weirdos like us. It's weirdos like us who think that our politics has to be really coherent and all these ideas have to make sense. The fact is that lots of people, there are places where they overlap, there are places where they disagree. The point is, and I think that this is the only meaningful division that there should be in society, is between the haves, by which I mean the super rich, the asset strippers, the corporations, and those of us who have to work for a living.
All right, we're almost out of time, and I just want to bring you this bit of news from Reuters, which is that Donald Trump to revoke legal status for 250 140,000 Ukrainians as US steps up deportations. It's not our story, but very quick reaction.
It's incredibly upsetting. I hope he doesn't go through with it. We have seen him change his mind.
It's all we have time for. I'll be back on Monday with more Politics Live, but thank you to all of my guests for joining me today. Have a great afternoon. Bye.